If I had to describe my work to someone who'd never seen it before, I would probably say, well, I like Gary Mansfield's, he's the one who did the podcast, he does the Ministry of Arts podcast, and he's the one who said, oh, it's like Bacon does Disney, and I thought that was kind of a nice, punchy statement that easily describes the work to anyone who's never seen it before. Hi, my name is Duncan McAfee, and I'm an artist from South East London. So I went to art school in the late 90s, graduated from Chelsea College in 2000, and I actually did a painting degree, but that was at a time when painting was deeply unfashionable and, well, hailed as being dead, and if at the very least, very problematic. So I ended up doing just about everything else for the 3 years that I was there, and left working mainly with sound, went into education, worked in and out of education for 10 or 15 years. And only really went back to painting in my 40s. And that was my way back into image-based work, was through physical collage. So I spent a lot of time chopping up all my old family photos and made some quite abstract collage work where paint started to kind of sneak back in, the odd kind of brush mark. And it was like I realized I was sort of fooling myself. It was like I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't a painter, but I could use paint in collage. That was like excusable. Until eventually I bit the bullet and admitted that I was a painter. So behind me is a series that I call the Exploding Heads. This is like the third or fourth generation of these. I've been making these paintings for a while now, and they kind of came out of previous work that I had done. So I made a series of work called The Drunks, which were, you start a painting by throwing red wine over a sheet of paper, and in my mind that was a sort of short circuit to making a religious painting with all the connotations of red wine and transubstantiation, which also makes it a bit of a joke for me, because obviously they're not religious paintings really. But I like the idea that they could be either prophets or street drunks. And then with these paintings, rather than actually using red wine, which I found discolors and changes over time, then I started making a kind of fake wine mix using different kinds of paint and inks, and even some like bits of dust and stuff to make the sediment. So the physical process of how the paintings are made is, the initial starting point is a blank canvas, and so in order to get over that, I kind of tricked myself into saying the painting's already started by throwing a splat of ink at it. So you end up with this ink blot that looks a bit like a Rorschach ink blot test, and then I respond to that. So I'll imagine what kind of head that might look like, and I'll draw some elements on there and ink those in, and then I'll sort of edit the ink splot by by painting in the colour, a flat background colour, and I can like take some bits out if I don't want them and carefully outline other bits, and then build the painting up in layers. So there'll be some quite sort of graphic, carefully drawn or filled in bits. There'll be some more expressive bits. There'll be like, something we covered up with a large brush mark, and I just keep building up until I've covered up all the bits I don't like, and you end up with a finished painting. But I like that that process for me of, rather than being a painterly painter and kind of smearing and moving around wet oil paint, it's like I'm playing a game of consequences with myself. So it's quite fun. I've taken all the reasons why I abandoned painting earlier in my life, all the anxieties around things looking like something else, or painting being difficult, and I'm just going, right, it doesn't matter, I like this, I like that, I'll just jam them together and mix it up in a kind of fun way. It's important that they're fun. I think that's central. My artistic influences are pretty broad, I would say, but Francis Bacon was the sort of the awakening the gateway drug. And I can remember coming up to London on a school trip to see a series of his portraits, which I think they were showing around over a couple of galleries in Cork Street, and just seeing the way that he captured, there'd be a photograph, black and white photograph of the person, and then the painting, and despite its kind of incredible looseness and chanceness, they looked like the people. He captured something about the people. So I was I found that magical, and I don't think I've ever really got over that. And I was also really heavily influenced by, I read a book called Ridley Walker by one of my favourite authors, Russell Hoban. And this is a book set 4,000 years after the apocalypse, told from the point of view of a 12-year-old boy in an entirely invented North Kentish dialect, which already is incredible to me. But then, within the story, they have these people live at a sort of Stone Age level of technology, but they're constantly unearthing like fragments of the past, so clues as to what happened, what the apocalypse might have been. And they've built this sort of mythological, spiritual system around bits that they found, which include things like a piece of a stone from Canterbury Cathedral, a pamphlet based on a painting, a punch puppet, and various other little things. And they kind of put them all together a little bit wrong and do these performances. So it's like they kind of know, but they're getting it all a little bit wrong and disjointed and weird. And so I suppose that's the sense I'm trying to get with my imagery, like it's all slightly misremembered bits of contemporary cartoons, a fragment of an abstract expressionist painting, a bit of pop art, a bit of colour field, just all these kind of things that are there in my conscious, and are kind of pulled together in quite a kind of intuitive, unthinking way, and stuck together just a bit wrong.